Lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't shuffle papers or clear his throat the way lawyers do when they're stalling. He just set his pen down very carefully, folded his hands, and looked at me across the desk the way people do when they're about to say something that will land differently than anything else said in that room that day. "Mr. Alderton," he said quietly, "I think you need to hear the rest of this before you sign anything." I was already sitting, but I felt something drop out from under me anyway. Through the window behind him, Sudbury was doing what it always does in November. Grey sky, bare birch trees, a light snow that couldn't quite commit. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang twice and stopped. Nobody moved. All of this because of a tin box my daughter-in-law had called garbage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Walter. No, I'll stop there. After 63 years of being the kind of man who introduces himself by first name and last, I'll tell you that none of that matters much to this story. What matters is that I'm 67. I live alone outside Sudbury, Ontario, in the house I've lived in since my wife passed 11 years ago, and that until the Thursday my son called to tell me his father-in-law had died. The most complicated thing in my life was a leak under my kitchen sink I'd been meaning to fix since August. I worked 31 years as an electrician, mostly commercial, shopping centres, schools, a couple of hospitals. Honest work. The kind that leaves your back talking to you at 60 and your hands permanently stained at the knuckles no matter what soap you use. I retired at 62, which felt like the right age and the wrong age at the same time. My pension is modest, my truck is paid off. I don't want for much, but I don't have much to spare either. My son James married his wife Christine about 12 years ago. Christine's father, I'll call him the old man because that's how James always referred to him, affectionately the way you do, was a retired civil servant. He'd worked for the provincial government in some capacity related to land records. A quiet man. Careful. The kind of person who never used two words when one would do and never spent $1 when 50 cents was sufficient. Christine had a brother too, younger by a few years. He's the one who concerns me most in this story, but I'll get there. The old man died in September. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful, which is the word people use when they mean nobody was watching. The funeral was on a Tuesday and it rained the entire day. The kind of rain that comes in sideways off the lake and doesn't care what coat you're wearing. Afterward, we went back to Christine's mother's house. Her mother had passed years before, but the family still called her that. James and I sat at the kitchen table while Christine and her brother handled what they called the practical things. That's a phrase I've come to distrust. Practical things. James pulled me aside near the end of the evening while Christine was in the back bedroom with her brother. He looked tired in the specific way people look when they be managing someone else's grief instead of their own. "Dad," he said, low enough that only I heard, "when Grandpa Roy was going through his health stuff last year, did he ever talk to you?" I said no, not really. The old man and I had gotten along fine, shared some coffee at Christmas, talked about the winters getting strange, but we weren't close. James nodded slowly. "He left something at your address," he said. "A letter." Christine doesn't know. I didn't understand what that meant until I got home. It was in my mailbox. A standard white envelope, no return address, my name and address written in the kind of printing that belongs to a man who learned penmanship before cursive became optional. Inside was a single folded piece of paper and, tucked behind it, a small rust-spotted key with a number stamped on the bow. The paper said only this, in the same careful printing: storage locker, 4417 McDonald Road, Unit 7. Don't bring Christine's brother. Don't wait. I stood at my mailbox for a long time. The birch trees were already starting to turn. A neighbour's dog barked twice from somewhere I couldn't see. The old man wasn't given to dramatics. He wasn't someone who left riddles. If he'd sent me a key and 4 instructions, it was because those 4 instructions mattered. I drove out the next morning without telling James. The storage facility on McDonald Road was the kind that's been there so long it's become invisible. Corrugated metal roofing, a gravel lot, a push-button keypad at the gate that somebody had written the code on with marker directly above the buttons. Unit 7 was near the back, end of the row, away from the light. I unlocked the padlock and rolled up the door. Inside was nothing dramatic. No stacks of cash, no secrets wrapped in plastic. Just a single filing cabinet, grey, the kind government officers have been using since the 70s, and on top of it another envelope, my name on the front, same printing. I opened the filing cabinet first. 4 drawers, each one organized the way only a man who spent decades managing land records could organize anything. Labeled folders dated in the upper right corner, arranged chronologically. The top drawer was financial statements, not his pension, not his checking account, something else. Investment accounts I hadn't known existed. The numbers, when I finally found a page that summed them up, made me sit down on the concrete floor because there was nowhere else to sit. Just over $800,000. I sat there for a while, listening to the wind move across the metal roof. The second drawer was correspondence, emails printed and filed, between Christine and her brother, going back 4 years. The first few were mundane. Family logistics, who was visiting when, what Dad needed at the pharmacy. Then, around 2 years in, the tone shifted. There were references to a will, references to a power of attorney which Christine had obtained to help manage her father's affairs after his first minor health scare, references to conversations her brother was clearly organizing. One email from him to her said simply, "He won't notice the smaller amounts. He stopped checking monthly statements 2 years ago." I read that sentence 3 times. The third drawer was his own documentation, handwritten notes, dated, describing specific transactions he had noticed, amounts withdrawn, dates that didn't match his memory of authorizing anything. A letter he'd written to a legal aid office dated 14 months before he died, describing what he called unauthorized withdrawals made possible through misuse of financial power of attorney. The response from the legal aid office was filed behind it, a form letter acknowledging receipt. Nothing more. The fourth drawer contained a single folder. In it was a copy of his actual will, not the version Christine had showed James, a different version, dated 8 months after the one the family had been presented, and a name and address for a lawyer in Sudbury. A man named Cyrus Abbott on Elgin Street. I sat in that storage unit for most of the morning. On the drive home, my phone rang twice. Christine's number. I let it ring. When I got back, I did not call James right away. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought about what the old man had written on that piece of paper. Don't bring Christine's brother. Don't wait. He hadn't said, don't tell Christine. He had been specific, precise, the way you get when you thought something through for a long time and pared it down to exactly what needs to be said. I called Cyrus Abbott's office that afternoon. His assistant told me he was expecting my call. That should have prepared me for what came next. It didn't. Cyrus Abbott looked exactly the way a Sudbury estate lawyer ought to look. Late 60s himself, navy cardigan, reading glasses on a cord, an office that smelled like old paper and the kind of coffee that's been warming too long. He stood when I came in, and his handshake was the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. "Roy called this," he said, settling back into his chair. "He told me someone would come. He hoped it would be before the estate was fully settled." He explained that the old man had come to see him 2 years prior. He had become concerned about financial activity he couldn't fully account for. His daughter had taken on management of his accounts after his first hospitalization, reasonable enough at the time, but he begun noticing things. Small amounts first, then larger. When he asked, he was told he was confused, that he was misremembering, that he'd approved things he couldn't recall approving. He'd been to his own doctor, who confirmed he was not confused. He was sharp. He was frightened. He told me he'd tried once to address it directly, Cyrus said. His daughter told him he'd been having a hard few months and maybe he needed to rest more. The word gaslighting exists in English for a reason. Cyrus had prepared documents, an updated will properly executed and witnessed, that differed meaningfully from the version the family had. Under this version, the assets from the investment accounts Christine had told Cyrus her father had closed years ago, not knowing he'd spoken to Cyrus privately, were to be distributed differently. There were provisions for charitable organizations. There was a portion held in trust for James and Christine's kids, administered not through Christine but through Cyrus's office directly. And there was a specific bequest to me, of all people. Not a large amount, but the old man had written in the accompanying letter that he trusted me because I was the one person in the family who had never asked him for anything. I had to put the letter down for a moment. Cyrus leaned forward. "There's more I need to show you," he said. "And after that, there's someone I need you to meet." The someone was an investigator from the Ontario Securities Commission, a woman about 40 with short hair, and the particular kind of patience that comes from having heard a lot of stories that end badly. She was already in the small boardroom when Cyrus walked me in, a laptop open in front of her and 2 folders beside it. "We've been looking at this since Roy's letter came to us 8 months ago," she said, cutting the pleasantries short in a way I appreciated. The withdrawals from his accounts were run through a numbered company. "Your son-in-law's brother," she paused and corrected herself. "Christine's brother, his numbered company." She turned the laptop toward me. Transactions going back nearly 4 years. The pattern was clean, not sloppy, not rushed, the kind of systematic small amount movement designed to never trigger a bank's automatic review thresholds. Someone who knew how financial monitoring worked or had spoken to someone who did. "What happens now?" I asked. "We filed for warrants 3 days ago," she said, "but I need you to understand what that means for the next little while." She looked at me steadily. "It means you go home and you act normally. You don't tell your son yet. You don't say anything to Christine. If they know we're this far along, things disappear." I nodded. She said, "Can you do that? I'm 67 years old. I've kept my own counsel through a lot of things. A wife's illness, an early retirement I hadn't quite planned for, the long, slow process of learning how to be alone without becoming lonely." I told her I could do it. I drove home in the early dark, the highway empty the way it gets in November when everyone's already decided where they're going and gotten there. I made dinner, soup, nothing complicated, and sat at the table while Christine called James and James called me, cheerful, asking if I'd eaten, telling me Christine was trying to sort through her dad's things and it was a lot. I said it sounded like it must be. I asked how the kids were doing. I went to bed at 9:30 and lay in the dark for 2 hours. Over the next 10 days, there were small signs if you knew to look for them. Christine asked, very casually, whether her father had ever mentioned a storage unit. I said I didn't think so, which was careful without being untrue. Her brother called me once. The first time in 3 years he'd called me directly to say he was helping sort out the estate paperwork and that if I ever had any old documents of Roy's, he should probably be the one to hold on to them. I said I'd have a look and let him know. That evening I told Cyrus about both calls. He passed the information along to the investigator. At night I started writing things down, not formally, just notes in the small spiral notebook I bought at the pharmacy. Times, exact words, who said what. I'm an electrician by trade. I believe in documentation. I believe in the difference between what you remember and what you wrote down. The warrants were executed on a Wednesday morning, early enough that the sky was still dark at the edges. The investigator called me at 7:15 to tell me it was underway. I was already awake. I'd been awake since 5, sitting in my kitchen, watching the sky change over the tree line out back. Christine's brother was contacted at his home office in Barrie. The financial records of his numbered company, his personal accounts, and his electronic devices were seized. At the same time, investigators were reviewing the power of attorney documents and the withdrawn version of the will that had been presented to the family. I didn't find out most of the details until later. What I knew at 7:15 that morning was that something I'd been carrying quietly for 10 days was finally moving on its own. James called at 9. His voice was strange, not angry, not exactly, but stripped down, like someone had taken an outer layer off it. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you." I met him at a Tim Hortons off the bypass, the one that's always half empty on weekday mornings. He already had 2 coffees on the table when I came in. He looked like he hadn't slept. He told me what he knew, which was some of it. Christine had called him crying, not about the investigation. Not at first, just saying that something had happened and she needed him to come home. He'd left work early. By the time he got there, she'd received a call from a lawyer, who was not Cyrus, explaining that her brother was being questioned in connection with financial irregularities in her father's estate. She didn't know, James said. He said it the way you say something you'd been telling yourself, and aren't completely sure you believe. I sat across from my son for a moment without speaking. I don't know how much she knew, I said finally, but I know what her father believed. I told him everything then. The key in the mailbox, the storage unit, the filing cabinet, Cyrus, the investigator, the documents in 4 careful drawers, organized by a man who understood that the truth is only useful if it's preserved. James was quiet for a long time. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked out the window at the parking lot. He came to you, he said quietly. He didn't have anyone else he was sure of, I said. The investigation took several months. In that time, James and Christine went through what I can only describe from the outside as something structural collapsing slowly. She cooperated with investigators. Whether she had known the full extent of what her brother was doing, or had understood it differently, or had looked away from things she sensed but didn't examine, that was for the legal process to weigh, not me. What the investigation found, in the end, was that over the course of nearly 4 years, Christine's brother had moved approximately $230,000 out of the old man's investment accounts through his numbered company, billing it as estate management and advisory services for a man who had never contracted any such services. The power of attorney had been used to authorize transactions the old man had documented as unauthorized. The alternate will had been deliberately withheld from Cyrus's knowledge during the probate process, a procedural error, Christine's lawyer called it, that the court chose to view less charitably. Her brother was charged with fraud over $5,000 and breach of fiduciary duty under Ontario law. He eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. He was sentenced to 20 months plus restitution. His numbered company was dissolved. His professional designation, he'd been a financial advisor, was permanently revoked by his regulatory body. I was present for part of the sentencing hearing. I sat near the back in a courtroom on Elm Street that smelled like floor cleaner and coffee from a thermos someone had brought in. The judge was a small, precise woman who spoke without drama. She said that exploitation of elderly family members through financial instruments is not a technical error or a misunderstanding. She said that the pattern documented in this case demonstrated deliberate, sustained intent. She said the word vulnerable and let it sit there for a moment before continuing. When she read the sentence, I felt nothing sudden, no relief, no satisfaction, just a slow releasing of something I hadn't realized I'd been holding in my shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Cyrus found me on the steps. He was wearing a coat that had seen better winters. He shook my hand. Roy would be glad this happened, he said. I said I wished it hadn't needed to. He understood what I meant. A few weeks after the sentencing, Cyrus called to tell me the estate had been fully resolved. The restitution was ordered and accounted for. The proper will, the one the old man had made sure existed, in the right drawer, with the right witnesses, held by the right person, had been executed correctly. The charitable provisions were honoured. The trust for James and Christine's children was funded and administered through Cyrus's office. I drove out to the storage facility one last time to sign off on some paperwork and collect the one thing I'd asked to keep from the filing cabinet, the old man's handwritten notes. 4 pages of careful printing, dates and amounts, and quiet observations made by a man who knew what was happening to him and decided, instead of giving up, to build a record that would outlast whatever anyone else was trying to do to him. I have them in a folder in my own filing cabinet now. On a Saturday in March, when the snow was finally starting to mean it, I drove out to the cemetery and found his grave. It wasn't hard. It's a small cemetery, the kind where people leave plastic flowers that outlast the real ones. I stood there for a few minutes in the cold with my hands in my pockets. I didn't say anything out loud. We weren't that kind of friends, the old man and I, but I stood there long enough to mean something. On the drive home, I thought about what Cyrus had told me early on when I'd asked why Roy had sent the key to me and not to someone else, not to a family member he'd known longer or trusted more deeply. Cyrus had said that Roy told him he chose me because I was the one person at the family table who never asked what something was worth before deciding whether to care about it. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but I understand why a careful man would value that quality, why he would choose, very deliberately, who to trust with the last careful thing he built. James and I still have coffee on Sunday mornings when he's not working. Christine is still in the picture. Some things crack and hold, others don't, and I am not the one to say which this will be. The kids are fine, which is the thing that matters most and that nobody bothers to say enough. The leak under my kitchen sink I'd finally fixed in January. Took about 40 minutes. I don't know why I put it off as long as I did. Some things wait for you to be ready. Some things don't wait at all. The old man understood the difference, and he planned accordingly. That's the thing about a careful person. They don't make a lot of noise. They measure. They document. They find the one person they believe will see it through, and they leave them a key. I was glad to be that person. I only wish he'd known, while he was still here, that it worked.